Hello and most welcome to 1072 of the Heidegger series, and we are presently actually in the memorial of the Estonian incident 1994 commemoration, and also many names are mentioned of the ones who succumbed during this horrible journey from Tallinn to Stockholm. It's a bit odd with the rubric here. Their name and their fortune we don't want to forget, instead of we shall not forget. It's very odd. It's like almost to give the idea that we will try to not forget, but it's inevitably that we will do eventually. Not showing complete determination. I will continue the text by Wrathall, Mr. Unpronounceable, I would say. At least for a Swede, I want to the third manifestation. I think I was ending at chapter 6 here. Check the time here. Division 1 in chapter 6 has been concerned with a preliminary account of being of Dasein. Dasein, Heidegger claimed, is essentially being in the world. In chapters 3 through 5, the phenomenon of being in the world was analyzed into its equiprimordial moments. In chapter 6, Heidegger aims to bring the phenomenon into view as a unitary whole. That is, to direct our attention to some experience in which we can recognize the essentiality unity of Dasein and the world, and see how the unity provides the foundation for the unity of disposedness, understanding, and discourse. We are entering another trinitary in Heidegger's neologisms, and nota bene, this is common. It always comes in threes. To make a somewhat long story short, the primordially unitary phenomenon at which Heidegger arrives is Sorge, care. There is both an affective and a projective dimension to care. The affective dimension is indicated in English expression involving the locution care about, for instance. I couldn't care less about X. When I say this, I indicate X does not matter to me. Conversely, what does matter to me is something that touches me, affects me, something in which I take an interest. The projective dimension is indicated by expressions involving the locution take care of. If I take care of X, I make myself, or experience myself as already, responsible to act with respect to X, and commit myself to some project that involves X. These ordinary meanings of care indicate the existential structures of disposedness and understanding, respectively. The phenomenon of care that Heidegger is interested in involves both dimensions. The world and our place within it matter to us, concerns us. We undertake projects with respect to it and experience ourselves as responsible for it. It is in this sense that Dasein begin reveals itself as care. Very interesting. Dasein and care are related. We recognize care as the being of Dasein, Heidegger argues, in the experience of anxiety. In anxiety, one feels an indeterminate threat from an indeterminate source. That is, in anxiety, we are not worried about any particular entity or possibility being lost, and we cannot say definitely what it is that makes us feel threatened. The oppressiveness of anxiety as mood comes from the way it prevents us from getting absorbed in any activity. Environmentally available entities sink away, meaning not that they disappear, but rather that they are completely without importance. Völlig belanglos. Nothing, not even another Dasein, is in a position to offer us anything anymore. This is because no person or thing can fill the lack that we recognize in anxiety. Our lack of belonging to the world, our uncanniness, Unheimlichkeit, literally not at homeness. When I am overcome by anxiety, it deprives me of the ability to fall or lose myself in conventional established activities, and thus takes away from me the ability to understand myself in terms of the world and the way things have been publicly interpreted. In fact, Heidegger argues that falling can be best understood as an effort to flee from anxiety, to dim down the recognition of the not at home. Anxiety shows us being in the world as a unitary whole. Then, because in it I recognize effectively that I need to have a world, and I long to belong to or be at the home in that world. Yet, I also recognize projectively that I don't belong uniquely to any world, and I might find myself unable to carry on with the pretense of belonging. In anxiety, then, my mood opens up my understanding and shows me that I can't be reduced to my current involvements. I am beyond them. This suggests the unity that exists in the different structural elements of my being in the world. In effectively showing me uncanniness, and thus showing me that I care about being in the world, anxiety at the same time makes clear that I exist as being possible. As free for possibilities and able to choose myself. Anxiety discloses our possibility to us by making our uncanniness available to us as something to project upon. Anxiety thus shows up as unifying our throughness into the world, a particular way of finding ourselves in the midst of entities in the world, and our existential freedom to pursue new possibilities. Heidegger generalizes from the case of anxiety to offer the following formulation of the structure of case. The being of Dasein means ahead of itself being already in, as being amidst, and I quote. In Heidegger's formulation, the ahead of itself corresponds to understanding, projection, and existence. Being already in corresponds to the disposedness, throwness, and facticity. Being alongside corresponds to absorption and falling. Very good. In Division 2, Heidegger will develop and deepen the account of the unity by mapping this tripartite structure of care onto three temporal extacies, future, past, and present, respectively. The closing section of Division 1 reminds us of Heidegger's ultimate goal, to answer the question of the meaning of being in general. Before moving forward, then it's worth reflecting on what the foregoing analytic of Dasein taught us about different modes of being. For instance, the analytic Dasein as being in the world sheds light on the beings of other entities by allowing us to move beyond the traditional problem of epistemological skepticism. The latter problem, as Heidegger sees it, is based on a misinterpretation of the being of Dasein and the being of the world. The analytic of Dasein shows that the problem of existence of the external world cannot seriously be raised. Both the skeptic and the philosopher must muster a defense against the skeptic share the propositions that Dasein is a fundamentally occurrent subject or mind, that the external world is a current manifold of mind-independent objects, and that the basic relationship between subject and object is that of knowledge. But once we understand that our being is care, which necessarily involves a concernful engagement with entities within the world, there is no room for seriously doubting the existence of the world, and hence no need to prove its existence. Indeed, doubting the existence of the world, like knowledge, is itself a derivative form of being in, which is only intelligible on the basis of our primordial way of comporting ourselves toward the world in our everyday concern. Division 1 concludes with Heidegger's account of truth. He wants to develop a primordial notion of truth, which he calls unconcealment. Unverborgenheit. Heidegger's translation of the Greek aletheia, uncoveredness, or Entdeckheit, is a species of unconcealment and applies generally to the unveiling of any kind of entity whatsoever. We can see what entities truly are in practical engagements with them, and not merely through propositions, judgments, assertions, or beliefs, as many philosophers tend to assume. Truth, understood in the most primordial sense, Heidegger maintains, belongs to the basic constitution of Dasein. This means both that we are always involved in uncovering entities and disclosing a world, but also that there is no disclosure without Dasein. No disclosure without Dasein. Entities are uncovered only when Dasein is, and only as long Dasein is are they disclosed. Our ability to have true beliefs or make sense or have true assertions is derivative of this primordial truth. something for the academics without a doubt. Untruth takes different forms in each of the different cases of uncovering. When opposed to uncovering entities in observations or assertions, untruth takes the form of false perception or error. When opposed to uncovering available entities in absorbed activities, untruth takes the form of misuse or incompetence. This brings about a kind of uncovering of entities, but they are uncovered in the mood of being closed off, disguised, or uprooted. When opposed to uncovering ourselves in our self-interpretations, untruth takes the form of inauthenticity. Many of these forms of untruth are the result of Dasein's essential state of falling, with its idle talk, curiosity, and ambiguity. There is an inherent tendency toward a fallen engagement rather than an original, context-specific discovery of the situation. Thus, it is essential that Dasein should explicitly appropriate what has already been uncovered, defend it against semblance and disguise, and assures itself of its uncoveredness again and again. End of quote. Authenticity thus requires that we continually resist the tendency to remain in untruth by resolutely reinterpreting ourselves and the world. This is true too of the ontological analysis of Dasein. Like any other attempt to uncover an entity in its truth, it itself subject to the tendency toward untruth, against which it must repeatedly renew its efforts. This rejection of eternal truths in ontology, which on pain of inconsistency must be applied to being and time itself, and can perhaps be read as a dim foreshadowing of the latter Heidegger's understanding of the history of truth of being as a discontinuous series of ontological frameworks, in terms of which Dasein has understood itself and its world. Nonetheless, these discontinuities and incommensurabilities between these frameworks are only intelligible as being episodes in the singular history of humanity, which must enjoy a higher order unity which joins together the plurality of historical epochs. It is in this sense that the later Heidegger maintains the central ontological role of Dasein, which he sets out in Being and Time. Now we're at Division 2 already. Division 1 of Being and Time offered us a preliminary account of the being of an entity, Dasein, that understands being. The aim of Division 2 is to articulate the sense of being of this entity, to show on what basis we recognize these structures as the essential ontological structures of Dasein. Heidegger will argue in Division 2 that temporality is the sense of being of Dasein. But before making this argument, he asks, is the preliminary account of the structures of Dasein sufficiently originary or primordial, ursprünglich? A primordial interpretation, Heidegger explains, is one in which we have fully worked out the structures in virtue of which an entity is what it is. To do this, we must first experience and grasp in their unity all the essential structural elements of the entity. The interpretation is confirmed to the degree that it affords us a rich, detailed, and clear apprehension of the ontological constitution of the entity in question. Division 2 begins then by reflecting on the question whether the analysis to this point has been sufficiently primordial, given that it is scarcely considered Dasein in its authentic mode. The first 3 chapters of Division 2 develop an account of authentic Dasein in order to overcome the inadequacy of the hermeneutical situation, before squarely addressing temporality and time in the final 3 chapters of the division. Chapter 1. Heidegger argues in this chapter that Dasein can only achieve wholeness through authentic being towards death. Making a case for this claim, however, will require working out what it means, in the first place, for Dasein to be a whole, as well as getting clear about the nature of death. The problem of wholeness of Dasein is made by pressing a paradox inherent in the nature of the care structure. Heidegger asserted that care is the wholeness of the structural whole of Dasein. But being ahead of itself is an essential component of the care structure. To be essentially ahead of ourselves means that we understand ourselves as well as everything in the world around us in terms of open possibilities. So the very nature of Sein and Dasein is in possibilities, not in faculties, not in occurrences, not what is already the fact. Worldly facts, exactly, and human facticity do not determine which possibility we must use to understand the world. As we can revise them or disclose new possibilities. But this world seems to rule out completeness or wholeness. It tells us unambiguously that in Dasein there is always something still outstanding. In the essence of the basic constitution of Dasein, there accordingly lies a constant incompleteness, Unabgeschlossenheit. The only time we stop being defined in terms of open, revisable possibilities is when our possibilities are closed off. Very important. And without open possibilities, we are Dasein no longer, nicht mehr Dasein. In other words, dead. Thus, if being a whole means having all our possibilities fixed and settled, then it seems that Dasein can't be a whole. Obviously, we need to consider what kind of wholeness is proper to Dasein. One of the most important lessons of Division 1 is that we cannot simply apply concept drawn from one mode of being to analyze the structures of a different mode of being. That is the method of academia today. It wasn't before, because never ever any thought of making rules of what something that sometimes worked, but sometimes not. The available is whole when all parts are present and together in such a way that it lends itself to fluid use. Being whole in this sense is a condition for available entities to be truly available. Having parts absent would render them unavailable. But Dasein's possibility cannot all be present and actualized at once. To be a Dasein requires that one have possibilities, and thus as open. So Dasein's wholeness must consist in a particular way of being open, a particular manner of comporting ourselves toward our openness, through which we achieve a unity in our being. It will require in particular incorporating our essential openness into our existence and making our way of being in the world cohere with that openness. This is something we achieve, Heidegger argues, by taking up a particular relationship to death. So let's turn now to this analysis of being towards death. And I think this is very important, because without death there can be no life. And I think that's the reason why we cling to life, is because we lost it. And this is not me being metaphorical or poetical in any sense. I'm trying to be completely actual and factic. This is how the world works, not the world of human beings only. This is how being works. And if you don't believe that, go look for quantum mechanics. It is not a philosophical religious insight that without death there can be no life. It is a facticity, so to speak, an unforbidden word for Heidegger. I'll use it now just for making the point even clearer. But for quantum mechanics, there can be no life without death. That's 100% sure. If you want to read more about that, you should check out the writings of, for instance, Fritjof Capra. Although he never understood quantum mechanics, in describing how the Tao of non-existence and existence is absolutely essential to build existence to the fullest, you sort of realize then, in that very moment, the necessity for emptiness, the apeiron, because not going into the apeiron will rid us of everything. Life. Yes, I know it says in the newspapers you're alive, and according to statistics you're alive, but it doesn't hold with physics. And since nobody knows about quantum mechanics, of course everyone strives the wrong way. And I think no one is better in understanding that than Heidegger. Das Man could be something positive. I think in our sphere, in our present thinking, it's always positive. But if you get alive in a physical way, in a biological way, I'm sure that's going to be shown by biology very soon, because quantum mechanics is entering biology. And it shows that the old concept of being alive is absolutely ridiculous. It is classically physical, and it doesn't follow the fact of quantum mechanics at all. And that needs to be understood here and now, I'd say. Because without understanding that, you don't get anywhere. You will be in that deadened position. And let's say in 20, 30 years, it could be shown that you're not alive in any measure. And hey, I'm coming from quantum mechanics. Philosophy was my second language, but physics is my first. And we know for quite some while, without accepting death, there cannot be no life. Although you want to maintain that illusion, it can be shown. Benjamin Libet was another one who much later showed that you're not conscious, you don't make decisions. You are already the zombie. And that is also the point of Ian McGilchrist. In the left hemisphere mode, there can be no life as such. Let's continue into division 2. Here again, chapter 1, I continue, sorry. Here again, it would be a mistake to draw notice of ending or death from the realm of the available and the occurrent. That's my point. Clearly, death is unlike the way mere objects come to an end. But defining Daseins death is complicated because each individual human being belongs to several overlapping types. I am a living creature. I'm a social being. I'm a psychological being. Sorry. So we continue with death here. According to Heidegger, and of course as is supported by quantum mechanics, and now also coming up in biology, there cannot be any life without death. The old concept of life is going to be gone within 10 years. The idea that you're alive when your heart is moving or your lungs is pressing is not of actuality, is not a physical model. It is something coming from metaphors of Descartes or some form of myth. But now we are moving away from that steadily. That concept of life being a pulse, that concept of a heart rate being life, or even that there is an activity in the brain. This is going to be gone, and the indication was already made by Jim Al-Khalili, who said the old life concept is ludicrous. It doesn't serve with quantum mechanics. And that makes Heidegger absolutely right, because according to him, it's a Griff mythology that life could be had where there is no death. Just like in quantum mechanics, the opposite is true, because death constitutes, so to say, the frame, to frame in an object, or frame in a temporal time, or frame in a lifetime. And if there is no frame, there can be nothing inside. And this is exactly the same thing as complementarity. And it's spoken that Heidegger pinpoints that so clearly. I have a hard time thinking that he wasn't inspired by quantum mechanics. But the thing is, the book came out just 6 months before quantum mechanics. That is in itself possibly a sign that it's not the case. But more importantly, that old life concept is absolutely ludicrous, and I reflected about that already when I was young. My mother has a cousin, and everybody said that he was not alive. He was living with his mom until she died when he was 60, and he never met anyone to further his life. He didn't do anything joyous, and he kept his whole life worrying. And I think the elderly, my grandmother, when she said he was not alive, she meant it literally. But my parents had this new mythological idea of life. It was like their heart rate. And I remember a discussion between my father and my grandfather was very wise. My father, more of the classical physical area, stated that he's still alive. And my grandfather said that must be impossible. What do you mean by life? Well, and my father said something very mythological or unscientific for once. He usually didn't say that. His heart is beating, or there is blood in his vessels. That will not do for an idea of life. Life has death to it. Death is the frame, and frames is what we need to discern objects, beings. Frames is a necessity to have time. And unlimited time without frames is no time. And unlimited space without frames or ends is no space. Neither is it objects. There is a codependency. And the same goes with life. There is already a way of checking the brain status, whether it's alive or is it dead, in the quantum phase state. And I imagine that will happen to bodies as well, that we will be able to discern who are dead and who are alive. Moving about seems just ridiculous, not really serious physics. You need to be in on the frame-like structure and static existence in the idea that we determine somebody's life today. It's gone scientifically. It's no longer a part of the scientific world. We need to get beyond that. We need to further a well-grounded reality in physics within also our thinking system. It needs to be acquired, the skill of being understandable. And I say thank you very much and have a pleasant afternoon. This is from the Mausoleum, and I think it's called, that is correct, of Estonia.